Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're calling us in from. I'm so excited to be here today with Gabriella. My name is Dalal. I'm here to welcome you to GMAT Club's MBA application walkthroughs. And that is a 6-week series where we cover applications to top 25 MBA programs. So every Thursday and Friday for 6 weeks, we will feature admissions experts and admissions teams going step by step through every aspect of the online application. Be sure to subscribe if you want to check us out to our channel to stay updated and support us in organizing more events, because if you support us, we know that you want more of these events, and then we're going to be able to cater to the audience. So today I will be your host, and in today's walkthrough, we're covering Stanford Graduate School of Business. So together with me today is Gabriella Samaya, who's a senior consultant at MBA Mission. Gabriella has helped hundreds of people with their MBA applications. Welcome, Gabriella. It is great to have you today.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Gabriella. So excited to be here with you. I have a very deep and special connection with MBA Mission, so I'm very happy that you're here today. So today we're going to walk through the Stanford Graduate School Business application, and I'm gonna hand you the mic, Gabriella, to walk through the application, and we can go back and forth. We're already seeing people calling us from Sao Paulo, Brazil, from Kenya, Germany, from London. So it's going to be a global webinar. I'm so excited.
All right. Well, let's dive in then. So the first thing you will see is a quick welcome and the application agreement, which is basically just a statement of honesty and so on, and that you're consenting to share this information. So I've already entered my name here. First facts, personal information is just basic demographic information. So has your name changed, social security number, etc. Add an address. So I will do this just because it will not let me go forward otherwise.
Yeah, I think this is going to be really helpful for the audience who's, the applicants who are watching us. If you're filling out the application, I say just do it with us right now. This is really, really helpful. So for the address, Gabriella, maybe you can tell us a little bit. So should this be your address where you receive mail? Would you say that this is the best address to add in there?
Yes, you want to put your current address, which is typically your mailing address. If they are different, as you can see, it says add a permanent and a mailing address. So typically, want to make sure you have your mailing address in there. Most communication these days is digital, but should you receive something by snail mail, you want to have that in there as well.
Right. And then if you have a social security number, that's not an obligation. So if you don't, then you could, it's optional to add that, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Great. Phone numbers.
So we'll just do some of the basic information. Okay, birth location. I'm just going to use
New York.
Not true, but I figured it's common. Primary citizenship. Okay, in my case, we'll do Canada. Secondary, let's see, United States. Okay.
Yep.
How many years, if any, have you lived in the United States?
So at citizenship, Gabrielle, what is that button?
If you do have an additional citizenship, you can click this button and continue to add any of your formal citizenships.
Okay, interesting. I don't think they had that before Stanford. It's interesting.
No, and they usually don't have, I don't know how many you could add, but apparently it looks like you can add quite a few. If you're sort of a Jason Bourne character and you want to list that many. How many years have you lived in the United States? I'm dating myself. I'm just going to put 20 in here. Okay. So I'm just going to skip this information because it's optional. This is obviously the background sort of racial and ethnic information that the schools can collect for data purposes. Pronouns and so on. Obviously, if this is important to you, please feel free to fill it out. How would you identify your gender? These all have no bearing whatsoever on your application. It's really just for the school's purposes of collecting data on who's applying, so that they can kind of better understand those demographics. Okay. This is an important one.
Right.
Additional context. We know that each person is more than a list of facts or predefined categories. With this question, we provide you with an optional opportunity to elaborate on how your background or life experiences have helped shape your recent actions or choices. So I always joke with my clients that these are optional, not really optional. It's a great opportunity for you to share something else about your background. I mean, sometimes you have this demographic information, but that doesn't really capture your life experiences. And so this is a great opportunity to share something about perhaps your upbringing, where you lived. Different schools have slight variations of this, but this is really open-ended. I think the key, though, is that Stanford recently, a few years ago, added this last piece here. So you want to connect what you're writing about to a recent action or choice. So that's kind of the lens you need to have here. So as an example, let's say my decision I'm making this up, but let's say I decided to forgo my Canadian citizenship and I had a personal reason for that. I might write about, the background that led me to that decision, but I need to connect it to some sort of action. So make sure that you're, reading the question closely. Yes, it's an open-ended question about your background, but, they are specifically asking you to explain an action or choice.
Yes, that's a really good tip here because, a lot of people they grew up somewhere, but they belong to this culture. They feel that they belong to this culture, or they lived in a lot of countries, especially with, I think, veterans, I would say, like in the US, right? Where they get positioned in different places and stuff like that. So this is a great opportunity to talk a little bit about that. And I think maybe, Gabrielle, maybe you can tell us a little bit here, like, I think they added this box because they don't want to see it in the essay, or what do you think?
I don't know that that's necessarily true. I mean, people have a lot of different backgrounds is a very open-ended thing, and it's often there's multiplicity there, right? You don't have a singular background, and you only have about 1,200 characters here, right? So which is about 200 words. So you're not going to be able to write your life story here.
Yes.
There may be some overlap with your essays, but that said, be mindful of that, right? These are opportunities to add more information. So if you're talking about a particular experience in your upbringing in what matters most, don't repeat that here. Or if you talk about the same experience, talk about it from another angle. So, think about it that way and just be mindful. I like to look at the application as kind of a holistic puzzle, right? So which stories do you want to tell in which part of the application? And there's a bit of a puzzle piece. Some stories might be better with greater context in an essay. Some might be great for something short and 200 words here.
I agree. That's a great tip here. Yeah, good. All right. So I think we're done with the first part of the application, right?
Moving along. Yes.
All right.
All right. Family information. This again is fairly straightforward. You would add, let's say, father. You add their information. You don't need to add organization or job title. Not affiliated with Stanford. Let's see. I'm just choosing things. Let's see. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. All right. I'm using my dad's not going to be. He won't mind. He went to McGill.
Are you trying to say that you're applying to Stanford this year, Gabriella? Is that what
Don't
you're
tell
doing?
anyone. I'm slightly above the years of work experience. Hopefully, they might not notice. You never know.
It's never too late.
Never too late. That's why I would have selected the MSX option there, just to.
Right.
I know I'm going to put in like 1975.
It's okay. We can make it up.
We can make it up as we go along. My actual
Yes.
year of graduation was slightly more. Okay, I'm just going to put.
So that's graduate school. I think these are optional.
They are optional, yes.
Yes, these are optional. So I think
we can list a number of them up to 2 graduate school degrees. If you had something else in addition to that, if you had done multiple degrees, you would likely mention that in the additional information section or on your resume. So let's save this.
Great. And I think they give a lot of tips up there, which is great.
They do. Yep.
Yeah, I don't think they had that before.
No, and it's nice because there are sometimes questions about what's relevant. Is my cousin a relevant reference? And depending on there may be cases in which that's accurate, but for the most part, it's typically, your parents, your spouse or partner. If you have children, close relatives who are affiliated with the school, they ask you to put those in here.
Okay. Would you say that, because I get this question a lot sometimes, like, would you say if you had a relative who's affiliated with Stanford, are your chances higher of getting into Stanford?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to quantify something like that or to give an unequivocal answer. What I say is you can't account for bias in that case. So technically, no, there shouldn't be. And there's obviously all the debates going on around legacy right now, in the public sphere and government with that, and we'll see where that goes. But, for the time being, does it carry weight? There are statistics that show that, there are, you have some advantages, but you know what? That is what it is, frankly. And so if you have someone there, throw it in. But I can tell you that the vast majority of my clients who end up at Stanford or Harvard or any of the other top schools do not have connections to them whatsoever. So if you don't think that that's a hindrance in any way, I think of it as maybe it's relevant if you have it, but if not, don't worry about it.
Great. So that's the family information section. Is there anything else in there? I think.
I don't think so. I think that was it.
Great.
So, miscellaneous considerations. Have you previously applied? Okay, no. Are you a current or former member? No. Are you currently serving the military? Have you ever been convicted of a crime? Joint and dual degree. Are you applying to dual degree programs? So I'm just keeping it simple and saying no for all of these. Presumably, if you clicked yes here, you would have to explain. So these boxes do pop up, for example, for military. But again, they're very straightforward. Fellowship opportunities. Really, Stanford only has, one overt scholarship application, and that's the Knight-Hennessy program. Otherwise, merit scholarships are sort of considered as part of your application process. There isn't a separate application or essay that you write. But if you are applying to the Knight-Hennessy scholarship, you would put your number in here. Any of these other organizations that you might be a part of, the consortium, Forte, et cetera, you would check that here.
Gabriella, maybe really quickly, so just to give the applicants an idea. So when I actually filled out this application, I had no idea what these before I did all the research, I had no idea what these organizations are about. Could you give just a quick brief about these organizations, Gabriella?
Yeah, absolutely. So the consortium is an organization dedicated to advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so typically you would apply separately to the consortium. And if you are, the schools, there's a number of schools, not all of them, that are affiliated with the consortium. So Stanford is obviously a member. And then you would be, either admitted to the consortium and admitted to Stanford, or not admitted to the consortium, but admitted to Stanford. So the requirement or the expectation is that you have demonstrated history of advancing DE&I. So that's kind of the consideration when you're deciding whether to apply through the consortium. Forte is for women in business. Jumpstart and MLT are also geared towards minorities in business. I'm actually not familiar with the Riordan MBA Fellows Program.
Yeah, I'm not either. Ramba,
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, is go ahead.
I think it's for the LGBTQ plus community.
Correct. And I'm not familiar with Questbridge either.
Right.
For the most common ones are Consortium and Forte, the ones at the top here. But again, these are all ways of showing that you've done your homework and that you're active in the MBA community. So if you are a part of these organizations, it's only it's only going to benefit you. But again, it's not a prerequisite.
Sure. Yeah. So Gabrielle, we have a question from Anne. Anne is asking, can we apply to Knight-Hennessy after admission into Stanford?
Unfortunately not. And you can actually only apply for Knight-Hennessy in round 1. So it is a separate application process with separate essays. So I believe the deadline is the same as the round 1 deadline.
Okay, great. Yeah, so if you want to take a look at any of these organizations, just do some research outside. Some of them you have to actually apply to before, so do a little bit of research about each and every one of them. So current location is for the interview, correct?
Yes, so
Okay.
that is just for interview planning purposes. Most interviews these days are virtual, so it's somewhat irrelevant. But to the extent that it's feasible for them to pair you with someone in your location, then they like to be able to know that when they're matching interviewers and so on. So we'll put, here we go. Okay.
And then there's a section for additional information about MBA
Yes.
interviews, right?
So this just explains that if you were invited to interview, you'll have the opportunity to update your location at that time. So it does happen that you might be moving from one city to another. So it's not as though this is final. You can always update that information.
Right. I love how they address all the questions that probably they get in the emails.
Exactly. I think that after fielding hundreds of these,
I'm adding, exactly. I'm adding this location, but I'm moving in 2 months. Like, what do I do?
And I'm sure they still get those questions, but nonetheless, I guess they're trying to make it as easy as possible or as clear as possible.
Right. Deferral.
So deferral eligibility, this is for those who are applying for deferred enrollment, which I can touch on just briefly. Basically, if you're graduating from college, then you would apply at the time of graduation to attend 2 to 4 years later. So it's a way of kind of securing an MBA down the line, but you obviously you need work experience in order to both contribute to and benefit from the MBA. So that's why they have it such that you would then enroll 2 to 4 years later.
That's a great option out there. Really good option. Securing kind of your future in a way.
Yeah.
Right? You'll be considered for direct enrollment.
Okay. Education. So there's a lot of text here, but basically what it comes down to is that they want to hear about every institution from which you received a degree. If you transferred, for example, if you spent at least one full academic year there, then you would upload a transcript from that institution. So, for example, if you did a semester abroad, you don't need to upload a separate, transcript from the school you attended. But if you did attend a full year abroad, then you would want to upload a transcript, or at least if it's included in your university's transcript, you would include it there. This also includes any schools you are currently attended if you are about to graduate. So sometimes, people might be graduating the summer or the fall, while they're applying, so they would upload that here.
Okay, great. Gabrielle, just really quickly, the GMAT Club officials are saying that maybe, so if you add yes, so if you check the box of yes for deferred, basically your fee is waived. Is that true?
That
or
is
refunded?
Yes, that is true. Different schools have, options to, achieve a fee waiver, depending on certain circumstances. But for the most part, it's, relegated to military is often one kind of consistent group that receives a fee waiver across the board. But in this case, yes, deferred applicants do. They're not earning any money yet, so or at least not post full-time earnings. So they give that a consideration.
Right. Gabriella, what would you say to the applicants who want to, for their GPAs, because of their country's GPA system is different? What would they do in this case? Do they actually convert it or not?
No, typically you don't convert it because there isn't really a standardized conversion method. Each school has its own way of understanding those GPAs, and it's highly unlikely that they've never seen, anyone from that institution. And so you would put it in, they give you the, the basis here. We'll add institution, as you can see. So, oh, they want me to, okay, here we go. This is in the United States, but let's see if I did an institution in India. You would fill in these dates. That doesn't make any sense. What did I say, 2002? Okay. Level of study, undergraduate. Yes. Degree. I'm just making stuff up, but
yeah.
Major, you could enter this anywhere here. I think this was aerospace. Let's put that in there.
Yeah.
I have had aerospace clients actually, so it happens.
Oh, that's so cool. My dad was an aerospace engineer, actually.
Oh, there you go. I didn't know that. That's a good choice. Okay. So we'll put this in engineering. Second major is optional. Second degree is optional if you did a dual degree. You can obviously carry on, multiple majors. So here's GPA and GPA instructions.
Right.
So they say your calculation should match the scale used by your institution. So, for example, in India, most schools are the GPA is out of 10. So you would maintain that scale. You don't need to convert it to, the US 4.0, or if you graduated from MIT where it's 5.0, for example.
Right.
So, calculate and report your GPA in the format in which it appears on your transcript, including the same number of decimal places. Report your GPA to the best of your ability, even if your institution does not list it on your transcript. So, they understand that there are always exceptions. They try to cover all of their bases. But if there is something, that doesn't seem to fit into these categories, you can always write, a quick bullet point, direct into the point in the additional information section, just saying, what, my institution doesn't list it on the transcript, but this is how it was typically calculated, and, give the number.
Yeah, and I think there's this misconception maybe, and Gabrielle, maybe you can correct me, like about the additional section box, and we'll get to it when we get there. But you can actually reference a few points about your application, and right, so it doesn't have to be like the full box for one topic for one thing.
Absolutely. Right? And at admissions committees, actually, they often appreciate it if you are, addressing these things. They read so much and they're going through this quickly. So bullet points can be a great way to touch upon a number of things. Let's say you want to cover, explain an unusual GPA calculation, for example, and a gap in your employment. So you would just have a bullet for each of those and try to be as direct as possible. I think one question that I get a lot is this an opportunity for another essay? Some schools call it additional info. Some schools call it an optional essay, which I think is misleading. It's not for you to write another leadership story. It's really just for you to explain anything extenuating, in your background that isn't explained anywhere else, like unusual GPA.
Right. Gabriella, we have a question from, and I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Opiemi. He's asking if you have a certified USC GPA conversion, does it help to provide it?
You can in the additional information section, but I wouldn't include it in this section because they're specifically saying, don't include the conversion. So include whatever is on your transcript. That's what you should put here. If you have, an official conversion, you can certainly add it in the additional information section.
Okay, that's great. Gabriella, we have also another question from Eugene. And again, I'm so sorry for not pronouncing wrong. If someone has dropped out, what should they fill out in that section of the application? And can they actually apply to the program if they don't have?
So there are, when you look at the application requirements, a 4-year degree is not necessarily a requirement. You do need to have, some years of work experience. So depending on the institution, it may or may not be required. If you had dropped out and incompleted, you would likely put, I guess honestly, that's an interesting situation. I'm not sure what you would put here. That's a situation where I really would email admissions and explain and ask them what they prefer.
I would do that too. That's a really good idea because, if they're not requiring that, that 4-year degree, then why do they make these mandatory? So
exactly.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Eugene, maybe you can contact the admissions department at Stanford and ask them because it's a very specific question for your case. So yeah.
All right. Anything else on this, or should we move along?
I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oops, there we go.
That's what.
This is why. Yes, we got sidetracked.
Yeah.
This person is very academically advanced. Okay.
Whoa, Gabriella.
I'm just, I'm assuming this person is top notch. Okay, first year. Maybe the first year was a little rough, and that's something they would explain, in their additional.
Right, and I remember a tip that I got from from MBA Mission was that if you have any parts of your application where it could raise a question when they read your application, put that in the additional section. What do you think, Gabriella?
I think that's absolutely great advice. That's kind of the purpose of the additional information section. Don't let, admissions try to interpret something. It's much better to provide clarity if you can. So something that might, raise a question like a particularly low GPA in 1 year. I mean, maybe there were such factors that influenced that you want to explain, and better to get ahead of it and explain it, albeit, directly and, concisely, but, better to get ahead of it and explain it than let them kind of make assumptions.
Yes. And for the ranking class, that's not mandatory, right?
No, not mandatory, because not all institutions have that. Upload transcript.
Oh, no.
That's okay. I'll upload something. It may or may not be a transcript. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, we're not going to hit submit on that application, are we?
No, I'm going to put, an old, I'm uploading an old resume.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Okay, so first generation college student, yes or no here. This is just sort of academic probation or discipline. If you were to write yes here, you would want to explain.
And I think
probation, same thing.
I think it's really important here to emphasize and just say, like, don't hide anything, be honest, be authentic. So many people get into these incredible schools, especially Stanford, and they've had, low academic standing, or they were placed on probation, but they explained why. So what do you think about that, Gabriella?
I think, it's important to remember that the admissions committees are human too. Life happens. They understand that. And, more often than not, it's not so much about, the incident that might have happened when you were younger, but what you made of it. And that's typically what I advise my clients too is, obviously be honest and be authentic, but, don't focus on the occurrence. Focus on how it's affected you and how you've grown since then, right? That's what matters to admissions. We all make mistakes at different points in our lives, and, that shouldn't limit your potential. And so I think you're absolutely right. Better to disclose it and be upfront. And actually, it's an opportunity for you to explain that you're self-aware and mature and that you have grown from these experiences. So,
I like that advice, Gabriella. Basically, explain what happened after. So explain how you've grown, after that. I love that advice. That's great advice. Gabriella, before we move on, we have a question from Clean Water saying, what is the cutoff GPA below which an explanation should be given?
So, there obviously isn't a hard and fast rule, but I would say if you have a GPA for a semester where you're below a 3.0, I would probably explain it. Definitely if you're at a 3.4, and it also depends on what your average was, right? If you're at a 3.5 average and you had one semester that was a 3.3, I wouldn't bother to explain that. But I think below a 3.0, it's far enough from the school's average that you would want to, you'd want to explain it.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're moving to, and please, like, for whoever is watching us, if you like this video so far, like it, subscribe. We're trying to make a lot of more videos walking you through applications with MBA Mission and with other companies. So please like and subscribe if you like this video. And yeah, that was really quick here. Sorry, Gabriella. Just didn't want to interrupt you.
So this is a question about your undergraduate funding. This, again, has no bearing on your admission. This is just background information that they are calculating. You do not have to be exact here. It's, they're looking for, ballpark numbers. So I'm just making this up. Okay. Are you eligible for federal Pell Grants? I'm just going to say yes. And this is where we go to the award section. And this is where, I like to think very broadly about this. It's somewhat loose in their description: academic awards, honors, or recognitions. So recognition can be, if you really don't have anything else to place here, or maybe you do, but you want to add to it. If you were, called out by a teacher in your class for exceptional work, maybe that's not a formal award, but you might want to mention it if there's, valid basis of selection, which you do have to explain. So it's not an opportunity to, to make things up or to exaggerate, but, think broadly about the commendations that you might have received. So
right. Especially if you were chosen amongst, I don't know how many students in your class, and best in class for just being best in class.
Yep, just being great. So basis of selection, this is where you would write, selected of, 400 students based on, academic excellence, and spell that right, but that's what's
and would you say that this section applies? We have a question from Youngmin Cho. Does this apply only to academic awards?
In this section, yes. So they specifically say if you have received any significant academic awards. There are other places for you to put, for example, professional or community awards.
Right. And Naomi is asking, what if I also have a graduate degree? I think we answered.
If you're asking, would you put an award from a graduate school here, then yes, this is any academic awards from any school that you attended, college or later. You wouldn't put anything from high school here, for example.
Right. Additional coursework.
Yep.
And
this is where you would add, sometimes people, to have additional coursework that they've done for professional reasons. Sometimes it's to kind of strengthen their academic profile. So this is where, you would write, for example, I'm just putting this in here, but this is one I often recommend. UC Berkeley has an online math for management course.
Right.
So, for example, if you, needed to strengthen your analytical profile, you might have taken this class and you would include it here.
Sure. This wouldn't include any Coursera's, LinkedIn.
You can put those on there. I think it's more meaningful if they're from well-known or reputable institutions. So, Wharton has a bunch of classes on Coursera, for example. I think that's more meaningful than sort of a class by an individual who has one on Coursera. But you can absolutely include it there.
Okay. Languages. So
yes.
Anything other than English. Right?
Yep. Anything other than English counts. Oops, let's see.
And just be honest about this, because your interviewer might speak that language. So,
yes.
And if you say fluent,
yes, it is not worth exaggerating here. They're not looking for people who are, multilingual. Yes, that might be an advantage, and it might, show something about your upbringing or your character, but it's not a prerequisite. So do not exaggerate here. And typically, if you're very elementary, I wouldn't necessarily even put it here, but, if you are minimally conversational, I think you can include it.
Right.
And again, this is, you don't have to click this. It's only, mandatory if you actually open this box. Okay. Everybody's favorite topic, test scores.
Definitely my favorite topic.
Yes. Well, that's why they need you, is because, it's everybody's favorite topic. Okay. So this just says that you're authorizing relevant testing agencies to share the official test scores with them. You typically don't have to have the official test score at the time of application. As it says here, you can enter the unofficial scores below. You will, however, be asked to provide the official scores upon admission.
But you can't take the test after the application. Right.
No. Right. Yeah, and I often get questions about, well, can I take it again and then report my, later test? What I've seen admissions committees respond to that is you can report it and we'll put it in your file, but it's not going to be considered your official test score. So it may or may not have any influence on the outcome.
Right.
Okay, so we'll add test here.
Do we have to actually? Is that mandatory?
Let's see. I don't know. Let's find out.
Can we put continue maybe? Oh,
yeah.
Great.
Okay. That's somewhat surprising. I would think that you would have to enter something before. We'll see at the very end if it lets me submit it, although I don't know if I'm actually going to submit it. So we won't find that out.
I was hoping we won't today. Maybe tomorrow, Gabriella.
It's my name in here, so it's only going to hurt, my ego, given that I'm putting in some very questionable information.
Yes.
Okay, over to the activities and interest section. So this is where you would put, anything that we sort of loosely call extracurricular activities. Sometimes people refer to it as community engagement. People also ask, if a hobby can be put here. I think with respect to hobbies, if it's something that you're very committed to, like let's say you're a triathlete, for example, or you're a, competitive musician, maybe you would put that here, right? But I don't think, for example, if you happen to really love knitting, that's necessarily something you would put here. I would probably put that as an interest on your resume, but I wouldn't put it here.
Right. Tell us about,
Okay.
What is this saying? That are significant and meaningful to you. Do we have to add this? I don't think we do.
No, you don't have to, but I would strongly encourage you. This is sort of one of the three buckets that I think, loosely speaking, admissions committees look for, right? There's the academic piece, which is, your undergraduate degree or graduate degrees, if you have it, your test scores, the professional, component, which is obviously your work experience, and this sort of extracurricular component, which I do think is important because they want to see that you're engaged in something outside of your own sort of personal advancement. So, if you are, it doesn't necessarily have to be a formal organization. You don't necessarily have to volunteer at a soup kitchen, although that's wonderful if you do.
Yes.
But they want to see, who are you beyond, your test scores and your work experience.
Right.
So I think it is a good opportunity to showcase other accomplishments. And certainly, if you have had leadership experience in an extracurricular activity, or if there's a particular accomplishment that you want to highlight, definitely make the most of that here.
Sure. We have a question here that says, can we include awards and extracurricular activities from high school or only during undergrad?
Typically, I don't suggest applying anything from high school, just because it's sort of considered long enough ago that, it doesn't necessarily have tremendous bearing. You might write about it if it's really significant to you. Maybe you write about it in an essay. But typically speaking, no, I don't include anything pre-college.
Okay. All right. So activity or interest.
So activity or interest.
Volunteer or teacher or
yeah, let's put teacher. That's a good idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
From 1965.
That's the first one that comes up, and so that's
we had beaches then.
We did, and they were probably a lot cleaner than they are today.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Average time spent. That's an interesting one because how would you quantify that?
Don't fixate on this. They're not. It's a ballpark figure. So if it's something that you did once a month, for a few hours, then I would include that. If it's ballpark, 10 to 15 hours a week, put in 12 and a half. Don't fixate on this. It's really just an understanding of how involved were you.
Right. Would you say, again, Eugene is asking, would you say that this is a good place for participation in a startup acceleration program, for example?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Because I wouldn't put that necessarily in the professional section because it's not work experience, even though it's sort of professionally related. So I would put that here. Yeah, that's a great question.
Yes. Okay, we have a question from KP Agrawal, but I think I'm going to answer this really quickly because we went over it. The Indian GPA, so basically you don't convert your GPA. That's what we were talking about earlier, right? I think
the short answer is don't convert it. Put it in the scale that it is on your transcript. So if it's out of 10, put it in out of 10. If it's out of 8, put it in out of 8.
Right.
Okay. So one thing while we're talking about the activities, think about the impact here. So it's great that you've participated in something, but you really want to highlight your accomplishments here. So if you launched a program within an organization, or if you led a program, or if you accomplished, you increased the fundraising that year, or membership, or something like that, those are things you want to highlight here. So use that lens. And what did I add or contribute? If you just participated, that's fine. But I think try to elaborate on what you added to the organization, or to the activity or interest.
Right. And then do you think it's necessary to quantify this as much as we can?
If possible, if you have, numbers on something like fundraising or increasing membership, it's not a prerequisite. It helps to quantify because it's easy to digest. When you're reading through this, you're reading through it quickly. That's a very simple thing to sort of process. But if you've had, increased engagement, for example, that might be something that's difficult to quantify. And so, I think you can still put it in here, but it's somewhat more subjective.
Right. Okay, so we have awards and honors. Mm-hmm.
Yep. This is, again, awards and honors, again, sort of broadly considered from any of the, organizations that you might have, received. So if you received, recognition for your contributions to the local library, you would put that here, right? And just to show you what this looks like, award or honor received, award level, date received, basis of selection.
And this is for your career, so professionally?
No, this is for your extracurriculars. So,
right.
Yeah. So anything outside of work. If you received a professional award, that will go in the professional experience section.
Got it.
Speaking of professional experience, yes. Here we are. Okay. So one thing to point out here, because it's a question that I always get, is whether to put multiple positions down within the same employer. The answer is it varies by school, so read the instructions closely. Stanford does ask you to break out your positions, so just something to be mindful of. So how much, full-time work experience? Are you currently employed? If not, then the gaps pop up here. If you've had any gap of 4 months or more in your employment, education, or educational history, you would write that, and then they give you an opportunity to elaborate on that.
Right. I think with the section that we just did, Gabriella, for activities and interest, we have a question that says, for the activity we do, by impact, do you mean that it needs to be impact on others or the community, or can it be impact on our own career, for example?
I think generally speaking, it means impact on the community, so sort of external impact. But that said, if it helped you advance in your career, you can write that. There's a lot of flexibility in what they're saying, and what you can share here. So if that's valuable, information, then you can add it. But yeah, I think generally speaking, what they're referring to is impact on the community that you are engaged with.
Right. And then Gabriella, really quickly, for the volunteering positions, would that be something that we put in the extracurricular section or on the CV? Eugene is asking.
So I would say both. On your CV, you should typically, I typically have a section that's either, community engagement or leadership, additional information. And I like to put anything that is, that you've been involved with meaningfully. I would put that on the CV, and then you have a chance to elaborate on it here, where you can, write about, add more description. You've got 320 characters, which is more than what you'll put in, a bullet point on the resume.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yep. This is just if you've ever been disciplined. If you start this, you have an opportunity to explain as well. Okay, so this is the employment history section. Mm-hmm. So Just to highlight again, this is one of these things with all the applications, just read the fine print closely. I think it's something that admissions committees really value. And so if you blatantly ignore, their description, that can be frustrating. So just read it carefully. This is all postgraduate full-time work experiences, one entry per position. That's what I was saying. So if you were promoted at the same company, you would list 2 jobs for each of those positions. Don't list positions held during college. That you would put during the activities and interests section if you feel like it's particularly critical. Include any meaningful postgraduate part-time work if you wish. And indicate whether you left a previous job and tell us why to help us understand your career path. And that's actually an interesting one because oftentimes we have multiple reasons for leaving a job, and some of them are not always, sometimes you were frustrated by the lack of advancement, or you didn't have mentorship, or something of that nature. I usually tell my clients to think about the positive reason for leaving a job. They want to see the motivation, not, something that you were moving away from. So I would frame that as wanted greater opportunity, wanted greater growth opportunity or greater ownership. So think about it in terms of the positive, what you were intentionally seeking versus what you were, maybe moving away from.
Right. Yeah, because it says what motivated your decision making. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Gabriella, just really quickly, we have 15 more minutes.
Okay, let's move faster then.
Yeah.
Sorry
All
about
marked. It's okay.
American Waterworks. Water.
I don't think we should fill that out, should we?
Oh, we can you're right. We can skip these things. I'm sorry. Okay. Uploading your resume, fairly straightforward. Good rule of thumb is 1 page per decade of experience. Awards and honors, same thing, professional awards and honors. And again, highlight the impact here and the basis of selection.
Right. So it would be like if you got best employee of the month or things like that would be here.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Post GSB aspirations. So this is the very, short-term version of your goal statement. You can be direct here. My post MBA goal is X, and, my long-term goal is Y. You might explain what you're hoping to do in those roles, but, you don't need to be lengthy here. They give you 255 characters, explicitly. Okay. Desired industry, desired function. You can select from the drop-downs.
Gabriella, before we move on to the essays really quickly, we have a question from a deferred applicant, Dira. She's saying, must I list all internships in my resume or only those I believe are relevant?
I think use your judgment there. I mean, if it wasn't a particularly meaningful internship, you might not include it, but because you don't have a ton of work experience at this stage, I usually would include all of them. I can't think of why I wouldn't include one, but you might have more information to share about those in which you were more involved.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's move on to the essays. I think that's everyone's favorite topic right here.
All right, so 2 personal essays. What matters most to you and why Stanford? And the first thing I'll say is that, these can be complementary. They don't have to. What matters most to you and why does not have to be about your professional goals. Oftentimes it's related, but it doesn't have to be. When you're thinking about what matters most to you and why, I think, you mentioned the word authenticity before, and I think that's really important here. It will come across it will be more compelling if you're writing about something that you genuinely value. That said, think about it from the lens of what are you telling admissions that will make them want to let you into business school? So it's still, ultimately they're still looking for business leaders, community leaders, and those kinds of characteristics. So be mindful of what you're sharing. Yes, if what matters to you most is, I'm making this up, baking, that's great. But, what about that is relevant to business school or to, an admissions person? So, that's kind of the question I always ask myself when I'm looking at topics for this question. Why Stanford? And we can obviously delve into this more if there are particular questions. Why Stanford is more direct. This is more of a typical sort of personal statement or goal statement. Presumably you are going to Stanford to achieve your goals. And so you need to articulate them in order to explain why you are, applying to Stanford. And so for me, I usually like to think of this structure sort of past, you open with what led you to arrive at these goals. So what's the origin of your goal? What is motivating you to pursue these goals? what are your goals? And then when you think about your goals, what skills or experiences do you need in order to achieve them? So there's usually a gap there that Stanford will fill for you. And that's where, the larger part of the essay comes in. You want to look at what are these gaps in my background or my skill set, and how will Stanford provide with them. So maybe it's leadership development. And so you talk about leadership labs, maybe it's, if you want to be an entrepreneur, then you might talk about Startup Garage or Venture Lab. There are particular classes that might be related to your field of interest. So I think my biggest tip here is not just to list the class or resource or program, but explain why it is relevant for you. What about that class? What skill is it going to give you, and how will you use it? Because it's easy to just list a bunch of classes. What they want to understand is that you've thought through what you're going to get out of it.
That's a great tip, because I think a lot of applicants, what they do is name drop.
Yeah.
And it's name dropping just because you want to show that you spoke with a lot of people. Well, what about that person intrigued you and made you decide to go to Stanford, right?
Right. I always say when it comes to name dropping too, first of all, it's not required. You do not have to cite someone in, a student or alumni in your essays. But if you have spoken with someone, don't just say, I spoke to so-and-so who told me that Stanford is fantastic. This doesn't tell admissions anything about you. If, for example, you spoke to someone who had a similar career transition from you and they told you how, Stanford helped them make that leap, that's relevant, right? If they told you about a particular community that was very active, that was relevant to them. So try to be specific as much as possible. You're trying to differentiate yourself from somebody else. So it has to be specific to you.
Absolutely. Like watching, an example of that is watching their YouTube channel, right? Some of their professors, they go on there and lecture, they have videos. And I think there's plenty of resources. And I think what the school wants to know, and Gabriella, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, what the school wants to know is you did your research and you believe that Stanford is the school that's going to help you reach your goals. And that's what they want to see.
Absolutely. I mean, they are, they are looking at their yield as well. And they want to know that, if you're admitted, you will choose Stanford. And one of the ways that you signal that is by showing that you've not just, done a quick perusal through the course catalog, but that you've actually thought about what this will do for you.
Right.
So it's important to get specific and, not to kind of fire off course names or, it's easy to look on the website, right?
Yes.
So be specific is kind of my
yes. And of course, if you have more questions about the essays or any parts of the application here, you can always book a free consultation with Gabriella through MBA Mission, and we're going to put that link in there. So we have 8 more minutes, Gabriella, to finish everything else.
All right. There's honestly not too much else. I will talk about the short answer questions, which I think is important as well. Again, these say optional. I like to think of them as not really optional because they really are. I love this about the Stanford application. It's essentially 3 opportunities to talk about sort of non sequitur experiences in which you've had an impact. And so, the essays are limited. You only have 1,000 words, but maybe there are other parts of your life, where you've done something noteworthy, and it doesn't have to fit into a theme. It doesn't have to be connected to anything else. You really can just spend about 200 words diving in and saying, hey, here's this thing that I did at work. Here was the situation, here's what I did. Here are the results, and here's why it was meaningful. So definitely take advantage of this. Again, try to think about, sharing multiple sides of yourself. So, don't necessarily write about 3 work experiences. You can if they're different, but, the point isn't just to sort of throw something in here for the sake of it, but think about, it can be an impact on an individual, a personal relationship. It can be an impact on a community, or it could be something at work too, right? So definitely fill these out. And again, think about how they fit in to the puzzle with the other stories you're telling throughout the rest of the application.
Gabrielle, really quickly. So someone asked, as a reapplicant, would you deviate from the content that one usually does for a first-time application?
It depends. Sometimes you may have, depends. Some schools have specific reapplication essays where they ask you specifically what's changed, right? But, you would want to, if what matters to you hasn't changed, then you might write about it again, but, if something didn't work last time, think about what you would do differently or what more you could add. So it's not that you can't talk about something. If it was particularly meaningful in your life, that might not have changed. But, you obviously want to be sharing something different. So, think about another angle. Maybe there's a deeper takeaway, or maybe you've done something, as a result since then, even if the origin story is the same, for example.
Right. Okay. And I think the other boxes come up if you check that little box, right?
Exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yep. So you'll have these 3 options here.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Additional information. We've talked about this before, but this is basically, extenuating circumstances, question marks, in your application that you can't explain elsewhere. It's okay to leave this blank.
Yes.
Letters of recommendation. Ideally they ask for 1 recommender from your current supervisor or best alternative. If you are not choosing a current supervisor, that is something that you would explain in the additional information section. Or here, in Stanford's case, they have a drop-down menu, so you don't need to explain it in the additional information section. A lot of schools give you sort of a carte blanche to explain it, but basically any one of these, would be a valid reason for not choosing a current supervisor. So when you go in here, just to go through it quickly, one quick thing, they have this here, use a professional email address if you can. There are obviously circumstances in which, your recommender might have just retired or they're between jobs. It's fine to use a non-professional email address, but they ask that you explain it here. All right. And then you fill in this basic information, and when you click send to recommender, they will receive an email with a link to the actual recommendation form.
Right. And this also applies to entrepreneurs or people who come from family businesses, right?
Yes, absolutely. So, obviously, if you're working for a family business, there might be a conflict of interest there. So you might want to choose, let's say you report into your mom, you might not want to choose her because she obviously is subjective, but, maybe there's a client partner that you work with, or an external partner, or, a colleague that you work with who is not part of the family. So, consider those things, obviously. Quickly, this one here, I get a question about a lot. Do you wish to waive your right to examine this letter? The answer should always be yes. This does not mean that your recommender can't choose to show you the letter. It means that you can't ask Stanford to show it to you. So just a simple difference there.
Right.
All right. And then you would send it to your recommender. And we are just about done. This is just various errors. And I would, you can view a proof of it. I like to download this just for my own records. You can save for later or submit. So there you go.
Okay. So I guess we're not submitting your application today, huh?
Probably not. If I was my own client at this point, I would say, you need a little bit more.
I'm disappointed. All of this work and we're not submitting anything.
If you can submit an application, well in 45 minutes, more power to you, but generally not advisable.
Gabriella, so if the applicants who are watching us right now, they want to get in touch with you, so they do it through MBA Mission and they book a free consultation, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think take advantage of it. It's 30 minutes to ask any question that's on your mind. We usually ask for your resume and some background information so that we can make the most of the call and have it be productive. But, it's a great chance to get a second opinion on something, or, if you're just sort of wondering about school selection or how to approach an essay, or you have a specific question about a recommender, it's really open-ended. And so I would say it's available to you, take advantage of it.
Yes, absolutely. Gabriella, I know this was a lot to do in 1 hour, so I really appreciate you. So on behalf of me and the GMAT Club and everyone who's watching us, thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
We look forward to hosting you again, Gabriella.
That would be lovely.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you have a great day. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Okay, bye.
Bye.